Lena did not cry when he rejected her. She had expected to. She had prepared for it, the way you prepare for a storm you can feel in your knees 2 days before it arrives. She had braced, locked her jaw, pressed her fingernails into her palms hard enough to leave 4 small moons in the skin. She had told herself, standing there in front of the entire pack, that whatever happened, she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. She did not fall apart. She simply walked away. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic last look over her shoulder at the man who had been written into her bones since she was 17 years old. She walked out of the clearing, through the line of people who did not step aside for her but did not stop her either, and she kept walking until the pine trees closed behind her and the voices became something she could pretend was wind. That was 6 days ago. Now she was here, wherever here was. High country, somewhere north of the territory she had grown up in, somewhere cold enough that her breath came out in small white clouds that hung in the air a half-second before the wind took them. Her boots were good. Her jacket was good. Her backpack had 3 days of food left if she was careful, a water filter, a small first aid kit, a multi-tool she had owned since she was 14, and a sleeping bag rated down to -12. She did not have a destination. This was, she had decided, fine. She had belonged somewhere for 23 years. She had belonged to a family, to a pack, to a fate that turned out to be a story someone else was telling. She had organized her entire life around a bond that got ripped out of her chest in front of 40 people on a Tuesday morning like it was routine, like she was a standing appointment that had been canceled. So fine. No destination. She would walk until she was tired. She would sleep until she was rested. She would eat until the food ran out, and then she would figure out the next thing. The forest did not care who she was. She found this, unexpectedly, a relief. She heard it on the morning of the 7th day. She had been following a creek uphill, not for any particular reason except that uphill felt more honest than downhill, and the sound of the water was good company. The creek was narrow and quick, running over dark stones, cold enough to make her hands ache when she filled her water bottle. She was crouched at the bank, waiting for the filter to do its work, when she heard it. Not a howl, not the clean, carrying sound of a wolf calling to its pack across open miles. This was something smaller than that, rougher, the sound something makes when it has been making sounds for a long time and is starting to run out of the energy required to make them. She went still. Her pack, the one she used to have, the one she had been expelled from like a splinter the body decides to push out, had a saying about wolves in distress. You leave them. You do not approach a wounded predator. You do not insert yourself into the business of something that could take your arm off if it decided you were a threat. The old ones had been very clear about this, had made it part of the rules she learned before she learned her multiplication tables. You leave them. Lena stood up. She put her water bottle in her pack. She checked that her multi-tool was accessible, in the small front pocket where she always kept it. Then she walked toward the sound. It took her 20 minutes to find it. The terrain went rough fast. Roots and loose rock and a slope that kept trying to send her sideways, and the sound kept cutting in and out, which meant she had to stop and recalibrate 3, 4, 5 times. But it was there. It was consistent. It was the sound of something alive that had not yet decided to stop being alive, and something in Lena's chest recognized that particular variety of stubborn persistence and moved toward it like a compass needle finding north. She smelled the blood before she saw him. He was between 2 boulders that had fallen against each other at an angle, making a rough triangle of shadow and stone. Massive. She registered that first. The sheer size of him, gray and silver and dark at the edges, the kind of wolf that made you recalibrate everything you thought you knew about how big wolves were allowed to be. His left rear leg was caught in a trap, the steel jaw locked around the limb just above the joint, the chain bolted to an iron stake that someone had driven into a crack in the rock with a mallet, and apparently no conscience. The wound was bad. She could see from where she stood that it had been there for days. The skin around the trap was dark, swollen in the way that means the body is fighting something and losing. The trap itself was an old-style jaw trap, the kind that had been illegal in this territory for 11 years, which meant whoever had set it was either very old or very committed to doing things the way they wanted, regardless of what the law said. He looked at her. His eyes were gold. Not amber, not honey, gold, like light through a church window, like something that had been heated until it changed. They tracked her with an attention that was completely still, completely awake, and completely unbothered by the fact that he was chained to a rock and bleeding. She stood there for a moment. She was thinking about the rule. She was thinking about the old ones, their very clear instructions, their very reasonable logic. She was thinking about the fact that she had a first aid kit designed for human injuries, not for a wolf the size of a small car, and that even if she managed to get the trap off, there was a real possibility that his first response would be to express his gratitude by removing one of her hands. His breathing was shallow. She could see it from here, the small, careful movements of his ribs, like he was trying not to take up too much space, like the breathing itself hurt. She walked toward him. She went slowly. Not because she was afraid, exactly. The fear was there, it lived in her throat and behind her sternum, but it was not the thing in charge. She went slowly because she knew about pain, about the way it makes every movement into a threat, about how a creature in enough pain will flinch from kindness, because kindness and cruelty feel the same when every nerve is already screaming. She stopped when she was 2 feet away. He watched her. He did not growl. He did not pull against the chain. He breathed his small, careful breaths and watched her with those gold eyes and waited to see what she would do. "Okay," she said, out loud, to the wolf and to herself and to the cold air and to the forest that had been her only company for a week. "Okay, I'm going to help you. I need you to let me." He blinked. She took that as a yes. The trap was a problem. It was old iron, heavy, and locked with a spring mechanism that had rusted from exposure. Her multi-tool had a pry bar attachment, a blade, and a pair of pliers, none of which were designed for this, all of which were about to be used for this anyway. She spent the first 10 minutes just learning the mechanism, which part moved, which part held, where the spring tension was sitting. She talked the whole time. She did not know why. It seemed like the right thing to do, to keep her voice in the air between them, so he knew she was not trying to trick him, so he knew where she was, so he had something to track besides his own pain. She talked about the creek. She talked about the way the cold felt different up here than it did in the lower territory. Cleaner, like the air had fewer opinions about it. She talked about her boots, which were good boots, the best thing she had owned, bought with 6 months of savings from working the night shift at a supply depot before the pack had considered her worth housing properly. The wolf listened, or he did something that looked like listening. His eyes stayed on her face. On the 41st minute, the spring mechanism released. She had been pressing the pry bar against a particular joint for what felt like the entire history of her existence, and then suddenly the steel gave, and the trap opened, and she fell backward and landed hard on the rock with her wrist bent wrong and said a word that echoed off the boulders and startled a bird somewhere above her. The wolf did not move. She sat up. She looked at his leg. The skin where the trap had been was bad. She had already known it was going to be bad, but seeing it freed from the iron was different from knowing it abstractly. The wound was deep and infected, red at the edges with the beginning of that particular darkening that meant it had not been treated, and it needed to be treated now, or the conversation was going to change completely. She had a first aid kit designed for humans. She used it anyway. She had antibiotic ointment, the good kind, the broad-spectrum kind she kept, because she was the sort of person who went into wilderness alone and had learned to be prepared for the specific ways wilderness could try to kill her. She had sterile gauze. She had medical tape. She had a small bottle of saline for irrigation. She irrigated the wound first. He flinched when the cold saline hit the raw tissue, a single full-body shudder that went through him like a current, and she said, I know, in the voice she used for herself when she was doing something that hurt, but that had to be done anyway, and he held still after that and let her work. It took a long time. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. It was one of the things the pack had said about her in the early years, before they ran out of good things to say, that Lena Voss was thorough, that Lena Voss did not leave things half done, that Lena Voss, given a task, would work at it with the particular focused patience of someone who understood that most things did not get better on their own and required human, or, well, wolf, intervention. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at the bandaging and thought it was probably insufficient and certainly better than nothing. The wolf looked at the bandaging. Then he looked at her. "Don't lick it," she told him. He looked at her for another moment, then set his massive head down on his forepaws with the air of someone who was going to allow this advice to apply to him, but was not going to pretend he thought it was a great idea. She built the shelter because the temperature was going to drop and he could not move easily, and she would not, she corrected herself, would not was more accurate than could not, leave him here alone in the cold with a wound that needed watching. The shelter was rough. She was not an architect. She was a woman with a pack and a forest full of fallen branches, and a need to solve the immediate problem, and so she solved the immediate problem, which was wind, which was the enemy when the temperature was this low. She built a windbreak from deadfall and stacked it against the boulders, using the natural angle of the rocks as one wall and building the other two herself, filling the gaps with smaller branches and pine boughs until the space inside was not warm but was at least no longer moving air. She built a fire at the shelter's mouth. Then she went through her pack and made the calculation that people in survival situations make, which is the calculation of what you have and what you need, and what happens when those two numbers do not match. She had food for 3 days if she ate normally. She had food for 4 if she ate like she was rationing, which she now was. She had water for tonight and tomorrow morning before she would need to go back to the creek. She had the sleeping bag, which she would need to share the warmth of with the wolf if she wanted to maintain his temperature overnight, which meant sleeping next to a wolf the size of a couch cushion made of muscle and old blood. She had made worse decisions. She made camp. That first night, she sat between the fire and the wolf with her back against the boulder, and her sleeping bag opened and draped across the two of them like a blanket that was doing its best, and she listened to his breathing slow from the shallow, careful rhythm of something in pain to something longer, something that reached the bottom of the breath before it came back up. She slept a little. Not much. Enough. In the morning she went to the creek and filled the water bottles and came back and checked the bandaging and found it needed changing, and she changed it, and he let her, and she talked while she worked and he listened, or did something indistinguishable from listening. This became the shape of the days. On the second day she talked more than she intended to. It happened the way things happen when you are alone long enough with something that does not judge you, when the silence becomes a specific kind of space, and you fill it, and you keep filling it, and after a while you are saying things you have not said out loud before, because the thing you are saying them to is not going to repeat them to anyone and is not going to look at you afterward with that particular expression that means they are filing it away for later. She talked about the rejection, not the event itself. She had made a kind of internal rule that she was not going to describe it out loud, not yet, maybe not ever, because some things live in the body and describing them gives them an address, and she was not ready to let this one have an address yet. But she talked around it. She talked about what it meant to have spent 23 years organized around something that turned out not to exist, or to exist but to have been assigned to someone else, or to have been real but have been reclaimed. She was still figuring out which of those was true. "I don't know how to want something for myself," she told the wolf, who was watching her with those gold eyes, which was his primary mode of interaction, and which she had stopped finding unnerving around the middle of the first day. "I was always wanting for the pack. Wanting to be useful, wanting to be enough, wanting him to—" She stopped. The fire cracked. A log shifted. "You know what the funny thing is?" She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I don't even know if I actually wanted him, or if I wanted what having him meant. Which is, those are really different things, and I spent 23 years not asking the question." The wolf made a low sound, not a growl, something else, something in the register of acknowledgement. "Yeah," she said, "I know." On the third day she got the fever. She did not notice it at first, because she was cold, and the cold had become the baseline of her existence, and a fever in a cold body feels almost pleasant at the start, warm in a way that your exhausted muscles interpret as rest, as kindness, as the sensation of a blanket your body is producing all by itself. She moved through the morning feeling loose and slightly floaty, which she attributed to poor sleep and not enough calories. And it was only when she went to the creek to fill the water bottles and stood up too fast and had to put her hand against a tree and wait for the world to stop tilting that she understood the fever for what it was. She had given her last food to herself and an injured wolf over 3 days. She had given her thermal liner to supplement the shelter. She had given her sleep to the fire. She had given, and this was the part that she did not fully have the energy to think through right now, while the trees were still doing the tilting thing. She had given whatever was left of her resources, after 23 years of giving them to a pack that had handed them back to her in a brown envelope marked "Return to Sender," to an injured wolf she had known for 72 hours. She made it back to camp. She changed the wolf's bandaging. His wound was improving. She could see it in the coloring, in the way the angry red had begun to pull back from the edges. He would not be walking on it for another several days, but the infection was losing the argument. She felt good about this, the specific satisfaction of a problem that is going in the right direction. Then she sat down next to him. She meant to sit for just a moment. She meant to get the fire going again and boil some water and drink something hot and take inventory of what she had left and make a plan. She meant to be practical and organized and thorough, the way she always was, the way the pack had always called her. Thorough, before they stopped calling her anything. She was so tired. She lay down next to the wolf, in the shelter she had built, with the sleeping bag pulled over her, and she told herself she would close her eyes for 5 minutes. She did not close them for 5 minutes. She woke up to voices, men's voices, several of them speaking low, which was the thing that broke through the fever first, the specific hush of people trying to be quiet, the quality of deliberate restraint. She opened her eyes. She was still in the shelter. The fire was very low, coals more than flame. The wolf was still beside her, his warmth solid against her back, his breathing steady, which her feverish brain registered first as the most important information. He was still breathing. Good, good. She had kept him breathing. Then she processed the other thing, which was that there were boots in her line of sight, more boots than a reasonable number of people brought into a forest, and the boots were very good quality, and the people wearing them were very tall, and she was lying on the ground in a shelter made of sticks looking up at them. She sat up. The world gave a considered, unhelpful spin. There were 12 of them. She counted, because counting was something her brain could do even when other functions were spotty. 12 men, arranged in a loose formation in front of the shelter, all looking at her and the wolf, with an expression she could not quite read, part calculation, part something that was almost caution, which made no sense given that she was a single woman with a fever sitting in a stick shelter, and they were 12 people who looked like they had been built specifically to not need to be cautious about anything. Then the one in the center moved. He stepped forward and crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, and she got her first real look at him, the kind of look you get when someone comes into your vision slowly, and your brain has time to process rather than just react. She did not have the fever brain for an accurate description. She registered height and stillness and a jaw that could have been used in the construction of load-bearing walls. She registered eyes that were the particular dark gray of sky before a storm that means business. She registered the way the 12 men behind him had arranged themselves relative to his position in the way that men who have spent a long time around a specific person do. A little back, a little angled, like planets that know which star they're orbiting. "You built this," he said. It was not a question. His voice was, "She filed this away to examine later, when she had more operating capacity." A voice that sounded like it had been used to say things that mattered, and had not wasted much time on things that didn't. "It needed building," she said. Her own voice came out rougher than she expected, scraped down to something more honest than her usual register. He looked at the wolf. He looked for a long time, in a way that was different from how you look at an animal, more personal, more specific, like he was having a conversation with him that she could not hear. Then he looked back at her. "How long has he been down?" "Since I found him. 4 days, maybe. Maybe 5. She had lost count somewhere in the fever. The trap was illegal, old jaw style. It was bolted to the rock. I know what kind of trap it was. The infection was bad when I got there. It's better now. I changed the dressing this morning. The margins are pulling back. I think the antibiotic ointment, it's human grade. It was all I had, but I think it's working. He looked at her. She had the fever-strange experience of feeling like that look was a kind of examination, like he was reading things off her that she had not written there intentionally. The hollow of her cheeks from days of short rations, the shake in her hands, the way she was sitting very carefully because sitting without care was going to tip her over. "When did you last eat?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She opened her mouth. She closed it again. "Yesterday morning," she said. She watched him make a decision the way you watch weather change. It happened across his face in pieces. This calculation, this conclusion. He stood. He said something to one of the men behind him without turning to look at them. 3 words. "Low." And the man moved immediately and efficiently in the way that people move when they are used to moving immediately and efficiently on instruction. She tried to stand up. Her legs registered a strong objection to this plan. He was beside her before she made the ground, one hand at her arm and one at her shoulder, and she was pulled upright with the same straightforward practicality that she had used on the wolf. Not gentle exactly, but careful, in the same way that thorough is different from gentle. "Don't," she said, because her first instinct had always been to say don't when someone tried to help her, because she had grown up in a pack where needing help was a kind of debt, and she had already accumulated enough of those. "You have a fever," he said. "I'm aware. And you haven't eaten since yesterday. Also aware. And you have been in this forest for—" He paused. "How long?" She thought about it. 7 days. Maybe 8. Something crossed his face then. Not pity. She would have pulled her arm away from pity. Something more like recognition. Something that understood the specific quality of 7 or 8 days spent in a forest alone, because the other option was somewhere that no longer wanted you. "There's a medical station 2 hours from here," he said. "You're coming with us." "I'm not leaving him." She meant the wolf. It was strange how clear that was, how unambiguous, how little she needed to think about it. The man looked at the wolf again. That same long, particular look. "He's coming with us too," he said, and his voice when he said it was, she filed this away too, for the examination she was going to do later when her brain was operating at full capacity. Different. Not softer exactly, but something under the surface of it that was different. One of the other men had appeared at her elbow with a pack that contained, it turned out, actual food. Dense, calorie-heavy, military-adjacent, and she took what was offered with more dignity than she felt, and ate while they prepared what was needed to transport the wolf. The wolf watched the whole thing. His gold eyes moved between her and the man. Back and forth, steady. She told herself it was the fever making her think that there was something deliberate in that movement, something communicative. Something that meant more than animal curiosity. She told herself that. The medical station was not what she expected. She did not know what she expected. A cabin, maybe, a rough structure with a generator and some basic equipment. What she got was a building that was large and clean, and staffed by people who clearly did not regard it as rough or basic, with actual medical-grade everything, and a room for the wolf, and a room for her, and in between those 2 rooms, apparently, a wall that was actually doing its job of being a wall. She spent the first day sleeping. She spent the second day arguing with the doctor about whether she was well enough to leave, and losing the argument because her fever was a fact that was not interested in her opinion of it. He came to see her on the evening of the second day. He knocked, which she found interesting. That he knocked, that he did not simply open the door the way that men who had 12 people arranged around them like satellites tended to open doors. He knocked and he waited, and when she said come in, he came in, and he sat in the chair across the room, the way a person sits when they have decided to have a conversation, but have not decided how to start it. She waited. "His wound is healing," he said. "I know. One of the staff showed me this morning. They said the bandaging was good. I was thorough." Something in his expression shifted at that word, like he recognized it, like it meant something specific to him. "What are you doing in that forest?" he asked. "Hiking," He looked at her. Walking, she corrected. Alone. Yes. For 8 days, give or take. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the early evening was doing what early evening does in high country. Going gold and then pink, and then that specific blue that comes before dark. The color of something ending that is not quite sad. What is your pack? He asked. She did not answer. It was the kind of silence that was its own answer, and they both knew it. He did not push. She noted this. The not pushing. The way he sat with her silence, the way the wolf had sat with her talking. Steady, patient, not trying to fill it or fix it. You kept him alive, he said, finally. He would have managed. He would not have managed. He said this simply, without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. The infection, 3 more days, and it would have been. He stopped. He would not have managed. She looked at her hands. They were still a little scraped from the rock work, from the trap mechanism, from 4 days of rough country without gloves, because she had used the gloves to pad the wolf's wound when the gauze ran out. I was just there, she said. You stayed. He needed. People don't stay. He said it with a flatness that meant it was a fact he had taken the time to verify. Not when it costs this much. People walk past things that are inconvenient and tell themselves it's the responsible choice. You used your food and your thermal liner and your medical supplies, and you stayed 4 days in below-freezing temperatures for an animal you had never met. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she did not have a file for. I don't. She stopped, started again. I wasn't doing anything brave. I was doing what was in front of me to do. I know, he said. That's the thing. He stood. He was at the door before she made the connection. Before her fever-reduced brain assembled the pieces into the correct order, which was the way the 12 men moved around him, the quality of the medical station that was not quite civilian, the specific weight in his eyes when he looked at the wolf's eyes when he looked at him, the same gold, the same particular quality of the wolf, she said. He paused. What is he to you? He turned back, and for the first time since she had woken up in the shelter to boots and voices, she saw something that was not calculation or steadiness in his face. Something that was, if she had to name it, the thing you feel when someone asks a question that gets through the outer wall. He is mine, he said. He has been mine since we were both very young. She thought about this, about the word mine and the specific way he had said it. Not ownership, not possession, something older than those. Something that was about being paired with a thing at the foundational level, at the level of what you are made of. What does that mean for you? She asked. When he is endangered. He held her gaze for a long moment. There is a tradition in the old bloodlines, he said. When the bonded animal, he stopped, chose different words. When he is lost, something in us is lost also. Not everything, but enough. He paused. He had been missing for 4 days before we tracked him to that location. I had, another pause, the longest one. I had begun to consider the possibility. She thought about what 4 days of considering that possibility would do to a person. She thought about the wolf, in that shadow between the rocks, making the small sounds of something that had not yet decided to stop. She thought about herself, on the bank of the creek, hearing those sounds and making the particular decision that she had always made, the decision she had made her entire life before it stopped being valued, to walk toward the thing that needed, regardless of the cost to herself. You should have been further along on your own search, she said. Not accusatory, just observational. Yes. What held you back? His jaw was very set. Politics, territory lines, a council that required 3 days of formal petition before authorizing crossing. She nodded slowly. I was in your territory, she said. Yes, I wasn't supposed to be. No, and yet, he agreed. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said, you should rest. Your fever broke this morning, but you are not. I'm fine. You've said that before. It was true then too, mostly. Something moved through his expression that might have been the structural ancestor of a smile, not the smile itself, but the geological layer underneath it that would eventually become one. "The staff will bring food," he said. "Please eat it this time. All of it." He left. She sat with the evening light, which was doing the full dark now, and she thought about the word mine and the way he had said it, and she thought about the wolf's gold eyes moving between them, and she pressed her palms together and tried to think about what she knew and what she was inferring and whether those were the same. She was still thinking about it when she fell asleep. She was well enough to walk 2 days later. She went to see the wolf first thing. He was in a large enclosed space, not a cage exactly, more like a room designed for large animals, open at the top and grassy at the floor, with the wounded leg splinted and his energy visibly returning, because wolves, when they are recovering, do not recover slowly or quietly. They recover with the same intensity they bring to everything, and he was pacing the three-legged pace of an animal that is ready to run and is being inconvenienced by temporary limitations. He stopped when she came in. He came to her, slowly, the big careful gait he had developed to manage the splint, and he put his nose against her palm in the way that she had, by now, learned to recognize as his primary greeting, and she stood there with a wolf's nose against her hand and felt the specific, strange, bottomless feeling of being recognized by something that has no reason to pretend. "You look better," she told him. He made a sound. "I look better too, allegedly." She crouched down to his eye level, his gold eyes. "Steady. I'm going to leave today. I need to figure out—" She stopped, restarted. "I need to figure out where I'm going next. Now that I don't have a next that's been decided for me." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said, which she knew was a strange thing to say to an injured wolf she had found in a trap, but which felt, when she said it, entirely accurate. He licked her wrist, once, which she was going to have to interpret as his version of "you're welcome." He found her outside, loading her pack. She had restocked it. The staff had offered, and she had accepted with more grace than the first time, which she counted as growth. New food, new gauze, new antibiotic ointment, new thermal liner. Her pack was heavier than it had been. She would manage. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." "Where?" She looked up from the buckle she was working. "I told you I don't have a destination. You told me you were hiking." "I was." "Lena." He said her name. She had not told him her name, but the staff would have asked, and the information was presumably available, and it landed in the air differently than she expected. Not like he was using it, like he was saying it the way you say a word you've been thinking about for a while. She stood. "You can stay," he said. That is to say, the territory can." He stopped. He was, she realized, a man who was very good at saying the precise thing he intended to say, and who was currently not doing that, which was interesting. "You don't know me," she said. "I know what I saw," he said. "I know you used your last thermal liner, and your last medical supplies, and your last 3 days of food on something that had nothing to do with your survival, and everything to do with refusing to walk past something that was suffering." He paused. "I know you built a shelter alone in below-zero temperatures. That was, incidentally, structurally sound, which is not a skill most people have. I had a difficult childhood," she said. "I know that too." She looked at him. "Not the details," he said. "I wouldn't presume, but I know the shape of it." He held her gaze. "The shape of a person who has given everything to something that did not give back." The morning was doing its early morning thing, that specific brightness that comes before the sun fully arrives, when the light is everywhere but has no single source. It made everything look slightly more than it was. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "No," he agreed. "You are the opposite of a charity case. I am, in point of fact, the party with the debt here, which you would know if you would let me explain the actual situation." She crossed her arms. "My bonded animal," he began. "The wolf." "Yes. When he is compromised, not just injured, but at the edge, it does something to the balance of the territory. There are people in this pack who depend on that balance. People whose safety is in part connected to the stability of the leadership structure, which is in part connected to—" He stopped. "This sounds more complicated than it is." "No," she said. "It sounds about as complicated as it is." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. "The point," he said, "is that what you did in that forest had consequences beyond you and him, whether you knew it or not. Whether you intended it or not." He held her gaze. "The forest does not forget what you give to it." She had been thinking about that sentence for 2 days. She had been thinking about it the way you think about something that sounds like a platitude and might actually be the truest thing you've heard in years. "What would staying look like?" she asked. She said it before she meant to, or maybe she meant to, and her mouth had just gotten there first. Either way, it was out now, in the morning air, and she did not take it back. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with the calculation she had seen in him before, not with the assessment, with something that had more open space in it. "It would look like," he said, slowly, "a person who is very thorough, being given problems that require that quality." She laughed. It came out of her unexpected, a small and slightly rusty sound, like a door that has not been opened in a while. "Thorough," she said. "It was the first thing I noticed." She looked at him. She thought about the wolf's gold eyes and his dark gray eyes, and the word mine, said the way you say something, you mean at the foundational level. She thought about 23 years of wanting what was in front of her to be enough, and then finding out it was never going to be. She thought about the clearing, and the people who had watched, and the particular silence that means we always knew. She looked at her pack. She looked at him. "I'm not staying because you asked me to," she said. "I'm not staying because I feel like I owe something, or because I don't have somewhere else to be." "I know," he said. "I'm staying because—" She stopped. She thought about it. Actually thought about it, the way she had been trained not to, the way 23 years of organizing herself around other people's needs had made it almost physically difficult to complete that sentence honestly. "Because it feels like the right thing to do," she said. "For me, not for someone else." He held her gaze. "That," he said, "is more than enough." She did not slide into the territory's life the way people slide into things in stories. No ceremony, no formal announcement, no dramatic moment where the pack lined up to accept her. That was not how it worked in practice, and she was, at her core, a practical person. She started small, a patrol route she was good for while her energy came back. A problem with a supply logistics chain that someone mentioned and that she, listening, turned over once in her mind and then solved, not because she was performing usefulness, but because the problem was right there and she could see the answer, and it seemed wasteful not to say it. People noticed her the way people notice things that belong, which is to say, slowly, and then all at once. The wolf was released from the medical enclosure on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she had found him. He went straight to her. Not to him, though he would, later, he would go to him, and there would be something in that reunion that Lena did not watch because it felt private in a way that was not hers to witness. But first, the wolf went to her, limping slightly still, the splint off now and the gait working its way back to even, and he pushed his nose against her palm and made his low sound of acknowledgement. She crouched down and put her forehead against his massive gray head and stayed there for a moment with her eyes closed. She heard the boots stop behind her. "He's been asking for you," he said, "since they cleared him." She stood. He was looking at her the way he had been looking at her more frequently in the past 3 weeks, the way the gray eyes had more open space in them, less calculation, more of the geological ancestor of whatever came after calculation. "You named him yet?" he asked. "You haven't told me his name," she said. "He does not have one," he said. "In the tradition of the old bloodlines, the bonded animal goes unnamed until—" He stopped. "It is a long tradition. The naming belongs to the bond, not to the individual." She thought about that. "And the bond is—" "Not yet decided," he said, "but deciding." She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. Then he looked at him, then back at her, with those gold eyes, with that patience that had nothing of pretending in it. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Just okay." But the word had the weight of something much longer underneath it, something she was still learning to say, something that had been waiting for the right open space to say itself in. He stood next to her, not touching, not filling the space with anything that had not been earned yet. The wolf pressed against both their legs, warm and solid, like a wall that catches. Outside, the high country was doing its indifferent, beautiful thing in all directions. The cold and the pine and the creek running quick over dark stones, completely unbothered by what was beginning, the way forests are unbothered, the way things that have been there a very long time are never surprised by what the people walking through them finally figure out. She had walked into this forest with no destination. That turned out to be the most accurate possible preparation for where she ended up. There is a version of this story where Lena goes back, where she returns to the place that cast her out and asks for an explanation that would have made no difference and would have cost everything she had just found. There is a version where the rejection stays the loudest thing in the room. That version did not happen. What happened was simpler. What happened was a woman who walked towards suffering when the rule said walk away, and who found on the other side of that decision a life that had been waiting for exactly that quality. Not heroism, not performance, not the version of herself that was designed for someone else's approval. Just thoroughness. Just the refusal to leave a thing half done. The wolf was named eventually. She named him. The name was simple. It meant, in the old language of the Northern Territories, the one who stays. She thought that was about right.